Hi, everybody, and welcome to the webinar. My name is Greg Roughan, and I work for Unleashed Software. And today our topic is inventory management mastery, where we are hoping to get as detailed and practical as possible, drilling into some of the tactics and methods that supply chain managers, ops managers, production managers are using to handle the kind of volatility that seems to have become the norm these days. With us, we have Sam Kenny, who is Operations Manager at Almighty Beverages. Almighty is a New Zealand-based company currently dominating the non-alcoholic beverages category with its very fancy flavoured sparkling water, as well as fruit juice products. Sam produces locally and distributes nationwide, as well as exporting to Australia. So it's great to have you here, Sam. And I'm looking forward to hearing how you navigate some of the challenges in your particular setup zone. We're also joined by Christopher Long, who is a fractional chief operating officer, currently working with an automotive products company called H O Wiles, which is behind popular brands such as Bars Bugs in Australia, which I'm sure you've all purchased at some point over the years, as well as motor club products sold via the Warehouse Group in New Zealand, plus other additives sold B2B, I believe, making for a nice and complex supply and production setup. Finally, we're also joined by Josh Wright, a consultant and systems expert, also from Unleashed. And Josh is on hand to answer any technical questions we might have. And later on, if you'll forgive the slightly salesy approach, I will actually ask him to show us some forecasting and replenishment workflows that you will hopefully find interesting. For now, though, I'd like to throw across to Sam and just ask you a little bit about your setup. Obviously, you're in the happy position of struggling with success at the moment. From an operations point of view, what's your challenge? What's your biggest challenge at the moment, Sam?
Oh, for me, we're maybe growing a little bit too fast, as I like to say, which is always a good thing. But from an operational perspective, it gives us a lot to kind of catch up on, which is good. So like you mentioned, we contract manufacture everything here in New Zealand, export everything to Australia for sales there and distribute nationwide here. So for us, I'd say right now our biggest challenge is cash flow. I think it's always cash flow is kind of the biggest thing. Cash is king, always has been, always will be, and inventory is a major, major part of that for us. So, my biggest piece of work day in, day out is just keeping on top of that inventory position to make sure it's kind of where it needs to be to support that cash flow.
Can I just to get some of the basics? Roughly how many SKUs do you have, and sort of how long is your production run, and also I guess your supply chain, how your lead times from suppliers, what sort of dynamics are you dealing with?
Sure. So we have about 8 different water SKUs, five or six now, juice bottle SKUs. It's across a couple different formats. So all said and done, we've maybe got 30 different SKUs, all contract manufactured. So our lead time there probably sits at about 6 weeks to get anything in, just based on production scheduling predominantly. And from a material perspective, we're very lucky in that the way our material comes in, we have maybe a 1 week lead time on material. So it's very short. If we don't have stock in place, that lead time pushes out to maybe 8 to 12 weeks. So that's where things can get a little bit niggly for sure.
Right. And so when you say your lead times, is that from external warehousing?
Yeah, so we have a couple different suppliers. They tend to have stock in place for us, which is why our forecasting piece is very important to make sure they have the stock available for us. If we don't have stock available for the stuff that needs to be imported, that always has to come from overseas, and that can take quite a few weeks.
Yeah. Do you mind, like, what are the kind of primary tactics that you're using, to manage that cash flow?
Yeah, for me, I think safety stock is key to make sure we have that right level of inventory. So, if I had it my way, I'd be spending all sorts of different cash to make sure we never ran out of product, but it's not 100% the way it can go. So for me, getting that safety stock level is kind of where I spend most of my time optimizing that position. And for us, that's a rate of sale piece. So I cover everything in kind of weeks of stock. And then there's obviously different tactics we can talk about in terms of categorizing those SKUs to make sure I have the right level of number of weeks cover effectively of the right SKUs.
Yep. And just briefly, actually, I saw a hand raised in the call. So if anyone has any questions, I think you ought to be able to jump into the Q&A and drop them there, and I'll try to keep my eye on it and pick them up. But I'll I'll call that out as they come through. What about you, Chris? Cash flow, is that it was a very, very complex setup. Maybe just to describe some of that to us.
Yeah. So cash obviously is always an issue. We're also expanding our manufacturing capacity in New Zealand right now. So that's put a bit of a drag on the cash as well. But and we're building a second manufacturing line in Australia. So that also is a bit of a constraint. But then the main thing, because a lot of our product is manufactured in New Zealand and sold in Australia, then you've got to keep an eye on shipping times and all sorts of things. And all of a sudden something goes wrong in the Middle East, and all the ships in the world take 2 weeks longer to get from Asia to Europe. And then all of a sudden there's less ships going from Auckland to Sydney or Melbourne. We've had that. So that means we need to keep, if it's a product we manufacture in New Zealand and sell in Australia, we'll keep more stock in Australia. But now we've taken on 4 lines into Bunnings as of late last year and early this year. So that's really kicked up a lot of demand there. In Australia, they've got 320 stores that are taking our product. In New Zealand, it's more like 20 to 30 stores, but just keeping enough supply. So now once a week, I'm walking around the warehouse counting empty pallet spaces and keeping track of those to make sure that because we don't want to move. But again, so now in Australia, we're optimizing any product we make here. We're taking down our safety stock because we can turn it around quite quickly. The major products we sell, the ingredients are pretty simple. All of the products, the biggest component is water. So luckily that doesn't run out. So it makes for easier manufacturing, but we're bringing in 7 new products into the market in Australia and New Zealand later this year. So that's what the manufacturing plant expansion in Auckland is about. And to add to complexity, we're selling that product in carton of 6 in New Zealand, carton of 12 in Australia. So that gives us not 7 new products, but 14. But AIM's been good looking at the forecasting for that, because some of that, so it's an aerosol product, the cans come out of China, and the main ingredients come out of the US. So, and the US manufacturing lines, depending on the product, could be a 3 to 4 month delay in just getting into the manufacturing schedule, and then you've got shipping time. So we are already working replenishment orders for a product that hasn't yet been put into a can and into a carton and put into the market. Right. It'll go into the market in October, but we have to do replenishment orders in August because we'll start to run out of some of those products in November. So those, right. You've got everything from those ones have very long lead times there. In our other products, we have a locally based plastic bottle manufacturer in New Zealand that make a lot of our bottles. Those ones we can turn around relatively quickly. And then you have peculiarities where we do a 3-litre product. And in New Zealand at the moment, we can't find a manufacturer of 3-litre plastic bottles. They'll do 2.5s, they'll do 5s. So we are buying 3 litres in Australia and shipping them empty to New Zealand, which luckily most of our product's pretty heavy. So you can fill the second half of a 40-foot container with empty bottles and it still doesn't turn out to be too expensive. So some of those pieces we're working into the planning as well.
Right. That's a lot to keep track of. Sam, you're looking like you're a bit relieved.
I'm very glad that I don't have quite that many SKUs to manage. Yeah, for sure.
The 2 things that leap out at me are, and I guess one is where Sam, you're talking about rate of sale data, and I guess my first thought was, are you getting that from within your current system, or are you getting that from retailers, for example? And then the other one is you're both obviously looking at that min-max equation. and rate of sale obviously factoring into that. But and how are you working those out? Are you physically in the spreadsheets? Do you using the classic calculations, per SKU as well? What's your setup, Sam?
Yeah, so obviously retailer rate of sale is important. That's like so with Woolworths and all the foodies network here. More important to us is how they purchase from us, so that rate of sale, because that's how we need to make and sell product, which we get out of Unleashed. Super simple, which is really good. Reports are really strong there, but we obviously manipulate everything into Excel, I think as everybody does to some degree. Can't escape it. Um, Love Excel too much sometimes, I think.
Yeah.
So yeah, we calculate rate of sale for every SKU, just to to get a sense of how quickly every product moves. It's just super important to how we produce and how we set our safety stock levels.
And you operating in units of a week, really? You're like, I need 1 week or 2 weeks. You
Yeah,
don't
I
round
count
off days?
everything in weeks worth of stock. It depends. Different industries will do different things. Like I've worked with days cover before, which is obviously very strong, but for me, just weeks is a little bit simpler for our operation.
Yeah. And I guess that's admin burden, just the minimum level of complexity to sort of do
Yeah.
what you need it to do.
Yeah, it's finding the resolution that works for your business, right? Like I find weeks works, but sometimes it won't, and you just need that little extra bit of detail.
How often are you going in and readdressing those min-max levels?
So I'll update that maybe once a week. It's
Yeah.
generally how often I kind of run my reports. There's obviously not a lot of change week to week, but it's good to have that kind of, yeah, the more stale that gets, the more problems you cause. So I
Yeah.
like to keep it as fresh as I can, but yeah, certainly not looking at it day to day, at that level of detail anyway.
Yeah. And Chris, what about yourself?
So my predecessor in this role, he had a very complicated spreadsheet, um, and to do a lot of what Unleashed will do anyway. So I've then, um, so when I came in, I looked at AIM heavily, and AIM then helped me, especially with the products where there's quite consistent demand. So things like that little demand graph that's on the AIM page really helps because some of our products are very consistent and some are very, very lumpy. Um, so where they're consistent, I just go with here's what the monthly demand is. For most of the products, I will have a minimum 1 month demand, maximum 3 months demand. We're cutting the 3 down to 2 in places because as we're growing, we're running out of warehouse space, because where the manufacturing plant's going now used to be warehouse space. So that you take out a few hundred pallet spaces, and now you're getting to fine tune things. Where the demand is a bit lumpy, then yeah, I have to drill into it more. Recently, one of our big retailers has decided to derange a couple of products and then I had to look at, well, okay, so what should, in fact, this morning I was looking at what the min-max on this product should be after those guys stop selling it or stop buying it from us, which is right about now. And it looks like a little bit, so that product will drop up to about 45% of what the demand was. So because, and it's complicated by the fact that Australia buys from the New Zealand business. So I've got sales in New Zealand, which is just intercompany sales. So taking all those pieces out, but and it's a relatively complicated product to make. It comes in a little box. It's got 2 different products in it, that sort of thing. So the max is 3 months. Products where all we're doing is putting liquid in a bottle, putting a label around a cap in it, and shrink wrapping and sending it to a customer. They're simpler, so the max can be lower on those. But it's those kind of things that we're working into the decisions.
Yeah. Interesting that you're operating, well, it's cash flow constraints both ways, but I guess the first one is cash flow, and the second one is warehouse space, which is going to be a
Yeah,
big cash flow problem if you have to go get another warehouse.
yeah,
Yeah.
It's always
Um,
a cash flow problem. Sorry, Greg, I was just going to say it's
yeah.
always a cash flow problem until you just about run out of stock. And then it's a case of money's no object, get your stock
yeah,
back in pace.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
it's very much a balancing act.
Um, I guess what are the kind of I mean, there's the technicalities of things, and we can all be the kind of king of our own domain. But businesses are made up of people, and and when we work in the real world, things don't always happen in a beautifully clean way. Are there standard operation, SOPs that you have in place that help you in this balance? And is it hard to sort of socialize that in the company? I mean, the first thing that occurs to me is, if you are carefully monitoring your lead times, Chris, and something turns up and sits in the loading dock for a couple of weeks, if that's the way everybody works, then your data's pretty much useless, and you're going to be spending a lot more money on your safety stock. Do you go around and growl at everybody to make sure they're doing the right things?
Well, growl is not my style, but yes, I have. So we have said when goods come in, we actually want people to stop what they're doing, even if what they're doing is customer orders, and receipt the goods. Now,
Right.
in order to do that, you need to make sure that there's no purchasing by email or over the phone. So everything has to be a purchase order. So the system generates all the purchase orders, and that's the only way. So we've stopped all of that. Somebody emailed somebody about sending something. So nothing turns up without it already being ordered, which is that those kind of disciplines really make a difference. So then you can say, just get it receipted. We've got a new operations manager in New Zealand, so I was there every 6 weeks, but now he's doing a lot of that. And before he goes off for the day, everything has to be receipted. So he's now got to focus on the team helping him to make sure that everything's receipted, because we have a sort of the opposite problem. Something turns up, they were waiting for it to go into manufacturing. The product's in the manufacturing and out into a finished good before people have realized that it actually arrived. So that's why we need to be really strict about getting it receipted. And then, because you'll only find out when you try to close out the manufacturing order, and it'll say, well, you don't have whatever you just put into the product because it hasn't been in the system.
Yeah.
So when I started, we had a lot of that, because if you do everything in a spreadsheet and you do email purchase orders and things like that, the system is the last to know about what happened, and that just makes everything worse. So the system is the single source of truth. So there
Right.
can't be a purchase without a purchase order. Obviously, we can't sell anything without a sales order, and we can't move things around the warehouse without telling. Either it goes into a manufacturing order or goes into a sales order. We're not doing things just because we thought it was a good idea. So some of that discipline, but even this morning I was having a conversation about some information that's not been put on a manual form. And I said, well, I think what we need to do is decide anything that's on a form has a real reason we require it. And if we don't require it, get it off the form. And if it's on the form, it can't be left blank. So that's sort of two parts to it. The warehouse guys are going, well, I haven't filled that in for 6 months and you didn't say anything. Okay, that should be off the form. So some of that discipline, and it's always, manufacturing is a people business.
Yeah.
And getting the right people who have the right respect for those things is a challenge. It's no different to any other kind of business, but maybe amplified by the people who like to make things rather than fill in forms. But yeah.
And so just to break it down a bit, a couple of the really important data points for you that you're saying, one of them is stock availability. So you need to know what's available for production. Otherwise, what you were buying stuff that you didn't need, it's actually in the warehouse. So your stock availability is a key part of your standard operation SOPs. And then the other piece I'm hearing is the lead times. And when you say you're issuing purchase orders and then receiving it within the same system, so the point at which the purchase order is issued and then the point at which it's receipted, you're measuring that gap, and that you're using that to calculate your min and max. Is that correct?
Well, the system will calculate lead times based on that.
Yeah.
When I first started, the lead times on some products were very short, which when you looked at it, because the email went out, then the purchase order went out later, then the goods came back in quickly.
Yeah.
And so we had to revise all of those. So my process is either on Friday or Monday, I will run through the reorder report, which is a principal source of information. I separate out by product group, which products I'm looking at. So at any one time, I'm really only looking like 10 to 15 products within a group to decide whether I need to order more or manufacture more. And so it's broken out by, I'll then, and all of those manufacturing orders or purchase orders will then be parked. And same actually with the manufacturing orders. And then around midday on Mondays, I have a meeting with the operations manager in New Zealand and the admin manager in New Zealand. And then we decide what purchase orders are to be released. And the reason I've got those two in that meeting is if they're walking around the warehouse, because I'm in Australia most of the time, and there's bucket loads of something, and all of a sudden I've said the system says we need more of it, they go, well, hang on, that's not right. And then so they'll release all the purchase orders that we agree that we need, and then we'll look at the manufacturing orders. And I will then, we use the Kanban extensively, so I will move the manufacturing orders from parked to scheduled, which is a status we have. And then the other statuses we use are based on the production line that order is going on to. So we've got line 1, line 2, and line 3, which is not all that creative. We've got a induction line, which some of our products need to be induction sealed so that they get a heat seal it's inside the cap, and then it goes through what's kind of like a big microwave, and that seals it. And then another line will be the aerosol line. And so that way we run 5 different lines. I just put them in scheduled. The guys on the ground decide what they're doing. When I put in the assemble buy dates, so they know when these things, and typically the manufacturing orders are out at least 3 to 4 weeks so that we know we can manage those. Now, it's made easier by the fact that our New Zealand business's biggest customer is our Australian business. So we've also got the Australian business planning a month or so ahead so that we can get all of that organised. Interesting, before I started, the New Zealand business would send to the Australian business what they thought they needed or thought they needed to get rid of out of their warehouse. Now we have it's only what Australia orders, but in exchange for that, Australia orders 4 to 6 weeks ahead of when they need things.
Right. Nice. And so what I'm hearing is your guys on the ground who are doing the dirty work of actually making the stuff have quite a lot of leeway to work out their own sort of setup and breakdown on the lines and all that sort of thing, because you give them space and then they juggle what they need to juggle, and they just know that you're the dates that you need things by. Right. And you're physically on those calls. I presume you're jumping on a Zoom call or a Teams call or something with your ops manager in New Zealand. And are you both looking at the screen and going, right, this one here, I'm going to drag this across now. And so you're just dragging it dropping it into another Kanban.
So we start off with the purchase inquiry view. And the advantage of that one, rather than just purchase order view, is it has the product on it. So firstly, all the ones that are in placed, and I saw that by delivery date. So what's overdue? Because if we placed an order hasn't turned up yet, now we have a potential manufacturing problem. So we look at those, and then the admin manager may chase up any that aren't coming in on time. Then we look at all the parked purchase orders, which are the ones I created either earlier that day or the day before. Then after we go through all that, then we look at the manufacturing orders. So we go from the purchase inquiry status placed, purchase inquiry status parked, to manufacturing Kanban. Right.
Nice. I was just smiling when you introduced this topic because I wish I could have one of these systems with my wife, because this morning some new maple syrup turned up and I put it in the fridge right next to the other full bottle of maple syrup.
Greg, we can have an offline conversation about the domestic pantry. I think I've mastered some of that.
Right. That's
I
the
have
next webinar topic.
I have a major excess inventory issue in our household, grocery wise. We have the back stock cupboard specifically for the overflow.
Just talk to them about the cash flow. They'll appreciate it. Listen, I am actually what I meant to do before. I'm going to launch a poll. I hope our viewers are enjoying this. I've got a poll here that really is to help us get a sense of what everyone else is doing because we're talking a lot about system stuff, but there's obviously a lot of off-system ways of working that are really sensible. And actually, Sam, I'm quite keen to get into the way you work with some of the sort of spreadsheet systems. So I'll just launch this and. It's a very basic little poll. If everyone's who is watching would like to take 30 seconds to fill it out, if that's okay. Um, and then I guess one of the things I really wanted to ask you both about a little bit, once we've had a chance to look at this, is categorization, which to me is again, your word was resolution, Sam. You can go SKU by SKU, but is that a smart way to work?
Yeah, I mean, for us, it can be, but that's because we use a grading system, or I like to. I use ABC. I think it's been called Pareto analysis, which I find very useful. Effectively, what you're doing is you're grading your products A, B, and C. Your A products represent the top 80% of your revenue. C is the last 5%, which gives you a real great view of your tail. That's what we call it.
Mhm.
Um, and I use that to say, right, well, I'm only going to hold, I'm going to adjust my mins and maxes for safety stock based on those grades,
Yeah.
which we do in Excel. There are calculators that you can do it online or you do it in Excel. It's relatively straightforward, but you don't have to update that one nearly so often. I maybe regrade everything once a month, but you can do it at different levels, right? So I do one grade at a SKU level and then one within a category. Because what you can find, say, if we use our sparkling water as an example, we might have a product that, falls over globally in terms of our entire product line and that sits in the C tail, but it can be a winner in the sparkling water category.
Right.
So while it doesn't happen quite that often, but there are some, quirks to those grades that can be useful to look at from a SKU level across your entire business, but then also within its category, because you don't want to axe a product out of the category if it actually does quite well in there, just because it's not a huge part of your business,
Yeah.
and vice versa. So that dictates our safety stock calculations quite heavily.
And from memory, what are we dealing with safety stock? Obviously, lead time, rate of sale, um,
Yeah.
and
So
go on, sorry.
yeah, I was just going to say from a lead time perspective, I think one of the hardest lessons I had to learn was that it's always going to take a week longer than they say it's going to take.
Yeah.
It's just across the board. So that makes up a big part of those safety stock calculations to make sure we can buffer for production delays. The other part of that is buffering for forecast accuracy. That's the hard lesson was demand forecasts are never 100% accurate. And I know because I used to do them. I
Yeah.
still do them now to an extent. So you've got to buffer against that as well. That's just the reality of how inventory planning works. So those are the two big considerations, we do for planning those minimum safety stock levels.
Yeah. I'm just having a look at the poll here. And if anyone wants to quickly rattle that off, I'm going to end that and just give it 10 seconds.
That first question's a really good one. That's always a lot
Right.
of fun. Yeah.
I think actually that's 83% of people are saying, can you guys see the results? No, I'll end
No.
that. Maybe I'll be able to share that. 83% of people are saying, here we go, share. Hopefully everyone watching can see this. Um, the majority of people can know what they've got in stock all the time, which is great. Realistically, only when I call the warehouse, walk down myself. You know who you are. Um, Stock versus,
Used to be us.
yeah. We honestly, in software land, we get a million stories where it's just walking down. People literally talk to us about, phone call hours saved or walking, warehouse visits saved in terms of the number of hours. We also hear about the daily stock take people as well, which is remarkable. Stock taking to know what you've got versus stock taking for your annual stock take. Um, important balance that everyone tends to get right. Some people are saying, actually 33% saying a real struggle that I'd like to manage better on the stock versus cash flow. Obviously harder in these like super dynamic environments that we've sort of been going through. Forecasting is 17%, something I'd like to do but don't know how to start. Critical to the way we work with systems in place. Interesting that a lot of people are forecasting. And 36% happy with what the system they've got. 18% bit sketchy, maybe something's not up to scratch there. And 45%, I was expecting that, is mostly spreadsheets with some software, e.g. accounting. Really interesting.
But Greg, you'd have to say that the people in this webinar are here because they're interested in systems. So
presumably, although
yeah.
like Sam's cracking his knuckles here, going, "Look, I do it all on spreadsheets," and my job is to do marketing for software. But I think if that's valid, and if you're a very small company and you just need to do it in a simple way, I think it's so valid. Do you forecast in spreadsheets, Sam?
We do, funnily enough. Yeah, we have the sales reps do all their individual forecasting. I combine it all, and that does just sit in the spreadsheet, which keeps me up at night in some ways, coming from larger ERPs. But for us, being a small business, that's just kind of the way it works. You don't want to overkill, and you can definitely do that with a big ERP.
Yeah.
So for me, getting that information out of the sales reps, not to slam the sales reps, they're very good at what they do, but getting information like that you've got to make it dead simple, dead quick. So that's why I do it that way. So I'm not having to teach them systems, which are often, can be easy, but I try to make it as simple and straightforward for them as I can. So I actually get that information.
Nice.
Yeah, and I would say, Greg, sales forecasts, I've actually worked in some of the biggest software companies in the world. And for the most part, they do their own forecasting using Excel because sales forecasting, I haven't found a system that does it well. It's a challenge.
It's the future, right?
Yeah.
I mean, predicting the future is.
Yeah. And we get, I mentioned Bunnings, we get weekly sales information and stock holding at Bunnings, and then I use that to go, okay, well, here's what the average weekly sales are across the products, and then how many weeks of stock are we holding, and adjust that, and that's done in a spreadsheet, and then that will then drive if I need to do a manufacturing order, which will go into the system. So especially for a new product introduction, new customer, those sorts of things, you need to almost handhold, I find. But established products, you can sort of just rely on the last 6 months history. But then I'm in a B2B market. Sam's in very much a consumer market, which, greatest example I ever heard was someone was selling bread, and this bread company, and they decided to make an app for their salespeople. So they tracked down the guy who was selling the most and worked out how he did it. And that's why they put the weather on the sales app for the reps, because if it was going to be hot or if it was going to be chilly, he went with crumpets, and if it was going to be hot, he went with something different. And what he was doing was working out the mood of the customer based on certain information. So, and the challenge is systemizing any of that when you're a small, medium business is almost impossible. And therefore, spreadsheet does it.
Yeah. Well, is this a good time, Josh, to we can have it's going to be like a rap battle, but an ops manager's battle, spreadsheets versus the AIM forecasting module.
Yeah, no, definitely sounds good. And yeah, kind of some really valid points there around the forecasting side and kind of what we can do to try and be as accurate as possible. And as kind of you mentioned, Sam, as well. I mean, it's only as good as the data that you put in. So yeah, hopefully we can show a little bit of aim and kind of highlight some points that what we can do. And yeah, if you've got anything to add, just shout it out, really. So what I'll do is I will share my screen. Let's go here.
So for context, for callers, obviously we work for Unleashed. It's an inventory management software system. AIM is an optional module that, what is it, $150 a month
That's right.
to add it on, and it brings a forecasting and replenishment for manufacturing functionality on top of the main system, correct?
Yeah, no, definitely, exactly right. So, I mean, we've got our core Unleash software, your inventory management platform, managing purchases, managing your sales, managing production. And really what Advanced Inventory Manager does is it plugs on top of the main Unleash system and just gives you insights around, production planning, demand forecasting, and just taking into account a little bit more around the details, for example, lead times and historical demand. So where I'm at the moment, you guys can all see that. Is that right?
Yep.
Too easy.
Yep.
So kind of where we're at the moment is the kind of homepage of Advanced Inventory Manager. So initially when you jump in, you're getting some insights before we even get into the main forecasting area. So we can look at things like inventory ROI. We can scroll down and we can see things for like our stock out risks. So things that we expect are at risk of not being topped up before we use all of it. If we go down further, we've also got just overviews of, for example, overall stock levels. So you can see the majority of my stock is overstocked. Obviously, not turning it over quick enough could cause cash flow issues. And then also things like supply performance as well. So making sure that those agreed lead times that we've discussed with them, whether that we've signed a contract and agreed that, it's a 14-day lead time, or, maybe it's a fluid lead time, that they're actually, coming to the kind of outside of the table around that lead time and seeing if they're actually, on time. So initially getting this view over the dashboard is always helpful. But then of course, as we've kind of discussed in this webinar, we actually want to get into the forecasting side as well. So within Advanced Inventory Manager, there's kind of two different areas to do that from. You've either got forecasting, which is more in-depth, one product at a time, forecasting for, seasonal, linear trends, year-on-year growth. You can take into account the components that are used, or you can look at modeling, which I'll cover first, which is more like a bulk action for forecasting. So it's using a methodology that we choose and forecasting for a lot of products at one time. So, for example, Advanced Inventory Manager through the modeling page, I'd usually click on these filters. This just allows us to choose what we want to forecast for in this area. So for example, I can go for all my overstocked products. Maybe I want to forecast for those to make sure that we're not buying more than we need to. Or I could go for a particular group of products, or, maybe the products that we manufacture. So for example, in my case, I'm going to filter actually for everything that's understocked. So I'm just going to click on this option here, draw it down, and then press apply. Now we can also choose the date range that we take into account, because of course, if you do have a really kind of fast growing business, 12 months of data probably isn't going to be that useful. Maybe you need to take into account the last 3, because if it's increased a lot, of course, it's not going to be accurate. But otherwise, from here, what we can then do is, for example, if we haven't already got lead days set, we can do that either in bulk by going override all, or we can use actuals. So what using actuals is within Unleashed is, for example, when you place a purchase order in the Unleashed system, and then when you receipt it in. So Unleashed will measure that for you and say, hey, look, on average, it takes 21 days to receipt your stock in for these items. It will then apply that to these products, which then helps us to then make that forecast afterwards. So I might go use actuals, or because this is a demo account, I'm going to actually set it as 10 days otherwise and apply that. And that will then just change the lead days. What I could also do is then choose my stock strategy for the forecasting side. So a lot of our customers and kind of feedback I get is just in time is the most popular way. And Sam and Christopher, I'm sure you've got opinions around this, but kind of just in time is what we would mainly use. And what that really does, it looks at our historical demand, it looks at our lead times, it looks at the buffers that we want to keep. Like you mentioned, for example, let's say it's a minimum of 14 days, so 2 weeks, and let's say no more than 3 weeks. Put that in, press calculate, and that will take all that information into account when then giving us these new min-max stock levels in the system. So really doing it in bulk, more for those kind of standardized products that have got a really good history, 3 months probably or more, and probably aren't growing at a very high growth rate, that are pretty stable is kind of when you'd use this modeling area.
Can I ask a silly question?
Yeah.
Functionally speaking, those min and max levels, what does the system do with them? Does it basically, do you export these here, or where do they go?
Yeah, no, definitely. So, I mean, the min and max stock levels are going to tie into the main Unleash system again. So we have a reorder report, which is available both in the base system and also when you've got Advanced Inventory Manager on it. And from there, that's going to actually give you the call outs to say, hey, look, you need to reorder these products now in the system. So we do have a replenishment tab up here, but the main way people will operate is they'll actually go to, for example, our dashboard when they hop into the system. They'll, go down and press show, and they'll see here under the transactions that they've got low and high stock alerts showing in the system. And then from here, they can jump on that on a day-to-day basis, or every week, or every month, however they like to operate, and then actually see what they need to reorder based on that time. So this will take into account, ongoing demand from open sales, open assemblies that you might be manufacturing, so the actual output or what's being consumed components-wise, as well as, purchases that are on water at the moment that are going to be arriving, but that haven't arrived yet. So it's going to take all that into account.
So, Greg, this is the one I use every week.
And this is is this your sort of smooth demand kind of scenario where you don't really need to think too hard about that giant order that's coming from your B2B supplier, or buyer rather, who needs 1 million units twice a year. This is your sort of always on.
Well, so our biggest customer in New Zealand, where we run Unleashed, is the Australian business. So what I'll do then is, for a product that only sells in Australia, I'll set the min and max to 0. And then where you see on order there, that's because as soon as the order gets placed, now I can see that I've got an order from a customer for product, so I'll need to create a manufacturing order.
Gotcha.
It gets a bit tricky where we sell 90% of it in Australia, and then 10% of it in New Zealand. We've got a product where typically we'll make a 40-foot container about every 6 weeks, made in New Zealand, shipped directly to Australia, contract manufacturer. And recently I've had to ask them to make 41 pallets. So one pallet gets sent to the New Zealand warehouse and the other 40 straight to Australia.
Right.
So that gets a little tricky. So then the min and max again should be just what I need in New Zealand to have in the warehouse in New Zealand to satisfy New Zealand customers. And then that Australian order, as soon as you put it in, it'll then trigger this suggested replenishment column over on the right-hand side there.
Right.
Sorry, Josh, back to you.
And you're able to place that in system, like you're literally able to place that order with your supplier in
That's
system.
a perfect question, Greg. You click the line. Josh will show you in a second, and then you go over that cog above it on the left-hand side, and you can either create a manufacturing order, create a purchase order. You can do a couple other things that I don't think I've done, but
Yeah, no, definitely. And there's a few options, and probably another question for you, Christopher, as well, is if, for example, let's say you've got some products that you need to replenish, but maybe it doesn't top up a complete container. Is there a certain kind of working or way that you work if that's the case, or kind of what do you do?
So for the Australian business, so prior to me having the conversation with the admin and operations people in New Zealand, I have the admin from Australia and New Zealand on a call. And in Excel, we just run a container schedule that just says, here's all the containers we've got going. And sometimes we may mix around because we rarely do less than a container load because it's frightfully expensive. And then you have to fill the container, either 20 or 40 pallets. And so we'll mix around things. And luckily, we've got 2 products in Australia that sell month in, month out, plenty of. One's a 375 mil product, one's a 500 mil product. So we may swap around a pallet or 2 either way, especially if we need to put in a pallet of something else. Yep. But that is done on a spreadsheet.
No, awesome. Yeah, and the reason I asked, just, I mean, as you kind of alluded to in this kind of reorder report, yes, we can place purchase orders. For example, I've got this set, so everything under the minimum stock level shows, and then I can, filter for a warehouse, for example, New Zealand, in maybe this case, and I can then see what I need to reorder. But then we also actually can flick this across to under max as well. So if there were additional, products that, you needed to fill up a container and you wanted to see what else is probably not below minimum, but could also maybe use with a little bit of a top up, you've got that option to actually flag everything that's under max as well in here. But yeah, as you kind of mentioned, when you've got this list up and you're ready to create that purchase order, then it really is just going in, selecting the products that we need to reorder. So I might just go these ones here. You'll see, for example, this top one, we've got a minimum stock level of 10. We don't like to have any more than 39. We've got 82 on hand, so we're actually kind of overstocked, but we've actually got 85 on order. So then we're below minimum. So our available is actually 3, or -3, I should say. So it's suggesting that we buy another 42 back in stock to get us back up to our maximum. And you'll see this one here. Obviously, I haven't forecast for this item because I don't have a maximum in here, but it's really just going to top it up back to the minimum that I've got set anyway. So we just go through, we press, add purchase, or if it is a manufactured item, create assembly. And if you did want to, for example, maybe you're overstocked in one warehouse but understocked in the other, you could always do a warehouse transfer as well. But let's say in this case we create a purchase, it will then generate a purchase order for each supplier in this list. So if you're, purchasing 20 odd products from 3 different suppliers, it's going to consolidate the products into each of those suppliers and create a purchase order for each of those suppliers in our system. So just streamlines that process. It's just a few clicks, and then we can get those sent out. We can go through the approval process if we need to, and yeah, get them ready to go and avoid that understocking.
Cool. Can I ask a question there, Josh?
Sure.
It came up with the warehouse you want that purchase order delivered to.
Yeah.
We get 99% of our stuff delivered to one warehouse, but ours comes up empty all the time. Do you know where that's set?
Yeah, so you're mentioning that, so there's an empty min-max stock level, or there's not?
No, it's the warehouse for a purchase order, the warehouse you want that purchase to be delivered to.
Yeah, sure. So I mean, with here, it would be the warehouse that's set as default. You could also, for example, as long as you've got a demand set within the reorder report, or a kind of min-max stock level against that warehouse, even if it's 0 or in negatives, it should then flag for which warehouse it's demanded for, as long as you've got demand set on the sales side or the production side that you're requiring that product to come in.
Okay, all right.
Cool. Not too easy.
Do you want to show off the fancy forecasting, Josh?
Yeah, we're going to jump in. So back to Advanced Inventory Manager. So we've got that forecasting tab that I mentioned at the start. So yeah, this is more for kind of that in-depth manufacturing. So for example, you've got a manufactured product that you want to forecast for the components for as well, or maybe there's a seasonal, linear, or year-on-year growth trend that you want to maybe apply to a product. That's kind of where the forecasting comes into play a little bit more. So for example, I'm just going to go and I'm going to choose a random product here. Let's say we'll go for a manufactured coffee product, because I've got a few of those in my location. So we'll load this one up here. So actually, no, we won't. We'll go for another one. So we'll go secret blend, let's say, just because it'll be a little bit easier, or Frankenstein blend. Sweet. So you'll see here, for example, initially I'm just setting the demand for this manufactured item. So we can do that by either, filling it in on our own. So we could, type it down here and we could say, expect 5,000, 3,000, 10,000 units to be sold. And I could just type them in as I like. Otherwise, you can always just kind of drag things up, or you can fill the forecast with a demand trend that you choose. So that would be, for example, a linear trend, which would fill, or a seasonal trend, which might have a little bit of spikes, or a year-on-year growth trend, where you could say, actually, I'm expecting this product to grow 50% year on year, and that would apply it as such. So firstly, we're setting that demand. Now, if, for example, you've got a marketing event coming up that might be wanting to really promote this product, you can always account for that as well on the forecast as well by increasing or decreasing these numbers accordingly. Now, once we've then done that, we've set the demand for this product over a certain time period. So you can do this for 6, 12, 18 months as you like. Then it's planning that supply. So how we plan the supply is, if it's just a product that we buy and sell, we would have, min days worth of stock as buffers and max days worth of stock as buffers. And then we would also have a lead time area to set. But for this product, we actually manufacture it. So I'm going to say, at a minimum, I want at least 10 days worth of stock. At a maximum, maybe I only want, let's say 30 days of stock. We'll reset the zoom, and then you'll see it kind of decreases over time. And what we then do for a produced item is we actually set the duration within the production record itself, which then means that we can take into account how long it's actually going to take to manufacture the item. So I think, Sam, you mentioned, sometimes it's more than a week, more than they promise, for manufacturing an item. So we can kind of put a buffer in that duration time as well to make sure that we're not going to, understock through our forecast as well. But the idea is that, once we set those buffers, once we set that duration time or that lead time, what we then do is we, go, do we want to replenish based on the min stock levels to get that alert in the system? Or if we want to do an interval, so maybe we only want to order once every month, we could set that up as well. And then it's planning the production if it's produced. So, we've set the demand that we expect for the next, let's say, 12 months. We've then also applied, what we want to keep as buffers and what the lead time is going to be. And then if it's a manufactured item, it's just got that extra step of them planning the production side, which then we have the option to, link the components that it's made up of. And that's tied back to our bill of materials area with an unleashed, so where we set the recipe. And then also choosing where the source warehouse is. So maybe, this is the demand for the Sydney warehouse, but we make the products in Melbourne. So we actually need to demand the components from Melbourne while, planning the overall demand for the manufactured item in Sydney. So we can do that here. And then what we then do is, once we've all applied that, we then press Save Forecast, and that will then apply to the components below. So you'll actually see, if I go Save Forecast, and maybe I put a review time of 3 months down the track to give me a reminder to do this again. If we then go in, so we have a few different metrics down here, but if we go down to component demand and we click into one of these products, for example, Australian coffee beans, and we click into that forecast now, you'll see we get a bit of information up the top here. But if we scroll down to production demand, you'll actually see the demand of this component that I need to buy as well, and when we need to buy it based on the lead times itself. And this is really useful, for example, if you've got multiple products, drawing down the same components that they're manufactured with. So yeah, Sam, Christopher, is that something that you guys have where you kind of share components?
Yeah.
It's not what I have currently, but it is something I've had in previous roles where it would have been exceptionally helpful. And I'm kicking myself that we didn't have it back then, because it would have been incredible.
Yeah, no, awesome. And yeah, I mean, it just kind of means that you've got everything in one area. So, if you're doing your day-to-day running, you're doing inventory management with an unleashed anyway, it just kind of saves, hopping into that spreadsheet as much. There's definitely a lot of customers that kind of come to us and, they're using a spreadsheet maybe for both their inventory management and forecasting, and, maybe sitting it alongside, for example, Xero, and kind of making this step across. It's a big one, and you've got to kind of export your historical data and so forth and put it into this. But kind of once you get that data and you've got the option to analyze it, it makes it a lot easier.
Yeah, well, Josh, this is how I did those new products that we're bringing to market, because I had demand in Australia and in New Zealand. So it was pretty much fixed forecast. It's a classic kind of channel pipe fill where every store needs some stock. And then I just said nothing for the next 2 months after that. And then we'll go with their average. And there's 7 products, but 5 of them use the same little valve. Right? So all of a sudden, they all use different cans. Well, the 14 products that are really 7 products in 2 different carton configurations, obviously 2 of the products use the same can, but 10 of them use the same valve. So again, it's so much easier when it aggregates it all together. I'd now like, it's rather than exporting the replenishment into a spreadsheet, to actually go straight into draft purchase orders or manufacturing orders. But I'm sure I can wait for that.
Yeah, no. So we were always developing this. It's yeah, kind of something that, for example, we just actually kind of added the feature where, if you've got an order that comes in and maybe it's only due in December, and we're kind of in June now, it will actually take that into account with the forecast. So we, kind of add those kind of features as we get that feedback, especially. And for example, for that one, it just means that, we're not kind of buying that product in now to store for that order that's demanded in December. We can kind of wait a bit and, free up cash, as you kind of mentioned, with that kind of cash flow side as well. Super important in a growing business.
Oh yeah, and that's powerful. I've got an example with one of the products we did for Bunnings that we manufacture in New Zealand and just sell in New Zealand. But the 3-litre bottle we've run out in New Zealand. The reorder report keeps telling me I need more, but I've got 8 months stock of finished goods. Whereas this would then understand that and would say, I need more components in 6 months, not now.
Yeah, no, definitely 100%. And yeah, that's kind of where this kind of nice little kind of calendar as such kind of sits in, where you've kind of got the demand for each month as such.
It's going to save you from buying a whole new warehouse, Chris.
Yeah.
That's part of my plan, Greg, because it's expensive to move. And we were talking about manufacturing being a people business, and the people usually live close to where they are in the manufacturing plant. And if you move, then they either move or they leave, and that's another problem.
That's a real problem.
It's not just cash, but it's plenty of cash problem.
Well, listen, I'm conscious that we're close to the full hour. I was going to ask you all sorts of questions about supplier tactics, because I think you've all got some interesting setups there. But I think we're out of time, so maybe we'll just wrap up with, do you want to hit us with like your 1 or 2 most actionable tactics or outtakes? What are your biggest recommendations for staying on top of that cash flow, staying top of your inventory management?
I was going to say, having a dead shot view of what your inventory position is at any point in time is so critical. But from the poll, it sounds like everyone's on top of it. So, everyone's doing what they need to be doing.
Nice.
Yeah, I think, getting your inventory accurate is the number one thing, which that's outside of the system. But then trusting the system. And because if you trust the system, and it's not the system that lets you down, it's then you realize where the manual processes are letting the system down. If you trust the system, you'll identify those more quickly, and then you can get those addressed and go back to trusting the system again. But it's a trust but verify kind of thing.
Yeah. Nice. Josh, what's your top tip?
Yeah, kind of as Sam mentioned, really just be on top of your inventory and kind of trust the figures, as even Christopher said as well. I think that's the biggest thing is, it's kind of a leap to go to an inventory management system, but once you get one in, trust the numbers and follow where it takes you. Because if you put good data in, you get good data out.
Nice. And mine is to check with my wife before ordering more maple syrup.
We can go offline with that one, as I said, Greg.
Yeah. Appreciate some tips there. Hey, listen, thank you so much, everybody. I really appreciate it. You're obviously extremely busy people working in some very interesting businesses. So I really do appreciate you sharing your time with us. If anybody on the call has questions, we'll flick you an email. You can hit us up. And we will send out a recording of this to everybody who either wants to review it or share it or hasn't been able to attend live. We'll send that recording out as well. So thanks, Josh. Thanks, Sam. Thanks, Chris.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.